just fight fire with fire is what you're saying, but
with more fire.
with more fire. Love it. So go back to the
flamethrower, Lee. You fight with a flamethrower.
So now I have to have a chief flamethrower officer too.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I am your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the most crucial conversation in healthcare leadership today. Today, it is my honor to introduce a former teacher of mine and now one of my research partners in the field of leadership studies, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Mark served for 38 years in the Army, retiring from the military in 2013. Recruited later by a large healthcare organization to advance a global medical partnering program, he was then asked to create a physician leadership program. And in 2016, his book, Growing Physician Leaders, was released and tells the story of the course that he was tasked to develop. Mark has since taught at a variety of healthcare organizations in the United States and has produced over 1,400 physician, nurse, and administrator graduates. During his time as a tanker in the Army, Mark commanded at every level from tank platoon to field army. He finished his Army career as the commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, where he led over 90,000 soldiers and partnered with the armies of 51 nations. He also served a total of 38 months in combat, including commanding the U.S. Army's 1st Armored Division and multinational task force Iron in northern Iraq during the 2007-8 surge. Mark graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1975 and holds 3 master's degrees, a master's of kinesiology from Indiana University School of Public Health, a master's in military arts and sciences from the Army School of Advanced Military Studies, and a master's in international relations and security studies from the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. In 2019, Mark earned a Doctor of Business Administration from the Crummer School of Business at Rollins College, defending mixed methods research addressing physician leadership in the healthcare industry. He was recently named Professor of Practice of Strategic Leadership at the Crummer School of Business at Rollins College, right here in Central Florida. And for those that still watch TV or stream it from an app, you may recognize this man from his appearances as the senior military analyst for CNN and CNN International between 2014 2024. Mark, it is great to see you again. Welcome to the show.
I am honored to be here with you, Dr. Scheinbart, my good friend Lee. And that bio needs to be reduced quite a bit. I must be getting old. I've got a lot of things that people say I've done that I don't even remember.
Well, we're both getting old, one day at a time. Maybe you have a little bit of a head start, but it's a testament to the work that you've done, and clearly the reason why we want you on the show. And I don't even know where we might begin the show. You and I have history together, so now we have some kind of chapter between the two of us. COVID together, broken bones, hurricanes. You've taught me a whole lexicon of terms that I've used in my career. That alone is an entire show that's too long that no one would listen to. So let's just get right to the stuff that our listeners really want to hear about. You certainly put in a significant amount of time over the years developing physician leaders and other healthcare professionals. With over 1,400 graduates from the program to your credit and the book that you published, Growing Physician Leaders, and then in 2019, you earned your doctorate. And you submitted and defended that thesis, and it's entitled Physicians Must Lead, a comparative study of 2 approaches to physician leadership development. What were you thinking? Have you had counseling for any of this? What were you thinking about? Why were you doing all of this?
That's a recurring theme in my life, Lee, when I keep asking myself, what was I thinking to do these things? A lot of it is serendipity, but it's been so much embedded with luck and a great deal of blessings that I've been able to connect with a new family of people in a new profession. After serving for 4 decades in the military, a profession, I was serendipitously asked to join a healthcare organization, as you said, for something completely different than leadership. It was building a program. I won't go into that, but as an additional duty, the chief medical officer at the time, a guy named Dr. Dave Moorhead, who you know really well, asked me to put together a leadership program for his physicians, because he told me, as well as the CEO telling me this, they didn't feel like they had a seat at the table. And that became a recurring mantra of helping physicians find their seat at the table. So it started in 2014 when I taught my first class that I had designed and had blessed by the CEO and the CMO at the system where I was working. And it turned on. And we saw changes in culture. We changed the way physicians were approaching things. We saw how they were building teams with doctors, administrators, and nurses to improve the organization and the organizational culture. And it really was just due to the fact that for the first time in many of the physicians' lives, they had a course on leadership that helped them to understand how to lead. You just don't do that. I mean, there has to be some understanding of what leadership is and how it's executed. And truthfully, Lee, as you know, because you were in my first class at another hospital, it really is the basics of leadership that most people don't get. So it's been fun over the last 10 plus years since my retirement now. I've had a chance to meet a whole new family of professionals in a different profession, and it's really been a turn on for me. And as you know, I enjoy and really am energized by the subject of leadership, the discussion, because it is so complex and so difficult, but at the same time, it's so very simple if you know the basics.
That's very helpful, I think, because most people probably do ask, at least to themselves, why does a retired lieutenant general lean into this? And you said it very nicely. It's really about leadership. Just so happens to be that you've landed in the physician universe and the health system, especially with the interprofessional learning that you provide. But it really is all about leadership. And I've learned a lot from you, and I continue to grow and continue to be fascinated. And the research you and I have done has opened my eyes as well. Let me go back to the book for a moment. Tell us what was on your mind to write about. Have you ever written a book before in your career? Because that's a hard thing to do, to write a book, to be
Yeah,
quite
it,
clear.
it is. It is a very hard thing to do, and I'll share a vignette that I had. But I was asked to write it by the system that I was working for at the time. After we had conducted 2 or 3 classes, I think it was, the CEO approached me and he says, we ought to advertise that we're doing this, and you've got a great program that is transferable to other people. Let's show folks what we're doing here at our system so that maybe other systems can pick it up. So I sat down and designed the book with some help from people who have done that before. I never thought, as a 4 decades veteran of the military, that my first book would be about doctors, but that's the way it turned out. Um, and and to really address your question about books writ large, I had a publisher at one time tell me, as we were getting toward the final stretch of publishing, he said, the Hemingway, I think it was, said that there are 3 M's that are ascribed to writing a book. The first M is, it is your mistress, and you want to spend every minute with it, and you want to continue to do, it takes up every spare minute of your time. Then the second phase is it becomes your master, when you're really doing the editing and trying to make it just right, and other people are looking at it and reviewing it. And then the final stretch is it becomes a monster, where you just want to get the damn thing done and get it published, but it continues to haunt you. Really, certainly applied to the way I approach this book. And I'm not sure I'm ever going to do another one, but we'll see.
Well, I have to call this out because I asked you about writing a book and you said, sure, and let me give you a template, but you did not give me the 3 M's. So you allowed me to experience all of that trauma on my own.
And
And
was
I
it
agree,
true?
totally true.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
might never do it again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but it all kind of, the mistress, master, and monster sort of fades away when you get that first box of books delivered to your house and you say, okay, I've accomplished something that perhaps other people might read.
Yeah, yeah, true story, true. Let's talk about your dissertation. Again, who would think that a person in your background, with your background, would choose to continue and advance your learning? And I know you are a lifelong learner and you're very curious, but why did you choose the particular subject for your dissertation? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, in fact, it was part of the reason that I went into a doctoral program. Two phases of that. The first phase was when the book came out. Um, a dean of the Crummer School of Business, where I now teach, asked me to come out and talk to his MBA students about leadership. Because if you were to read the book, and you'll know that where it's titled Growing Physician Leaders, it's really just about the basics of leadership, and it can apply in any profession. This dean of the business school asked me to come out to talk to his MBA students about leadership. So when I went out there, he said, would you be interested in, we've started this new doctoral program at the business school. Would you be interested in doing it? I noticed you don't have a doctorate. And it did appeal to me. But the other thing that drove it was I was in a fight at the time with the systems HR director about the makeup of the physician leader class I was teaching at this system. She wanted nothing but doctors in the class. And I said, well, in order to reach our objectives and what you're trying to do, the several goals that we stated for the course, one of them was to make doctors better teammates and to help them build teams. And I said, in order to do that, they have to understand the other members of their teams, the nurses and the administrators. So she didn't want that. She thought that was way beyond the scope of what I was doing. And at one point she said, well, I've got a master's in business administration and I know this is how you do things. So I thought, well, okay, I didn't want to say it, but I've got a few masters myself, but maybe I'll trump you and get a doctorate and actually study this kind of stuff. So when I went into the program, I already had an idea of what I wanted to study, and I wanted to compare and contrast the two different styles of teaching or class experience, the environment, one being an all physician class and the other one being a mixed class. My hypotheses, and I'll summarize, were that both classes would improve in their leadership dimensions based on, pre and post test survey that we were doing. But my understanding is based on what we were trying to do, the mixed class would do a better job of improving. They would improve more. And that occurred in every single level. So it sort of proved that the interprofessional requirements of having healthcare workers come together and learn with different cultures within healthcare seem to be coming to fruition in the study.
So thank you for all that information. And it's fascinating to hear how the complexity of an organization and the people in their roles held you accountable to what they wanted. You held yourself accountable to what you thought would be more important. And you end up developing not only a really interesting topic, but a result that displayed a deeper understanding of interprofessional education and the value of it. So,
well, the interesting thing I'll say too, Lee, that I didn't know, but it came through my research, was that the American Medical Association has said since 2008 that interprofessional education is the best way to teach healthcare workers. So, no one, when I brought that up to the HR director after I finished my dissertation and kind of rubbed her nose in the results, she said, oh, this interprofessional education sounds interesting. Well, now that particular system is doing nothing but that. So it's a good way to look at what you can learn on a daily basis.
That's a great ripple effect too. That now people are adopting, whether it's because of this professional society or the work that was done, that this is the way to go. So,
Right.
So what are you doing now in terms of healthcare leadership and physician development or interprofessional education?
Well, I just finished within the last couple of months an initiative from an individual by the name of Dr. Stephen Beeson, who I think you know really well, out in California. He has an organization called Practicing Excellence. And what he's asked me to do over the last 3 years is record literally dozens, in fact, hundreds of 5-minute tips about leadership, on every element of leadership. And his program is sent out to different hospitals and that sign up for it. And physicians or nurses or administrators can listen to these 5-minute tips as kind of a mini lesson, a mini podcast, if you will, as they're driving to work or walking around the house on the weekend or whatever. And it just gives them input on what to look for in leadership. That's been fun. I still am asked to speak at a lot of organizations, healthcare organizations, not the formal classes like that we participated in together, or the ones that I designed for the system that I worked with, but it's more like the keynote speaker or come talk to us about leadership. And I'm really balancing those with a whole lot of discussions on national security today, which is my other passion, making sure we get it right in terms of living up to the Constitution and defending the nation. So I've done both those things, and at the same time now have branched into this world of teaching strategic leadership and strategy to business leaders in an MBA and a doctoral program.
Well, that is very interesting to our listeners and meets my next question head on. So you and I experienced COVID living nearby each other, working through our leadership course together. But ever since, Mark, and you know this, healthcare organizations are continuously stressed from staffing shortages, the movement of temporary workers, also known as travelers, the supply chain disruptions again and again and again. Last fall was IV fluids out of the Baxter manufacturing plant in North Carolina. Now, some of the international things that you're alluding to that are disrupting our ability to move products around the globe. We have all of the environmental incidents that are happening, like I indicated, the floods in North Carolina, fires, hurricanes, and of course, organized labor. So for chief medical officers and associate chief medical officers that are regularly stressed about the delivery of safe and effective care, have you any thoughts as to how our listener leader base might manage either on the spot or with that strategic thinking in mind that you just described?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lee, and I'm going to plug your show since it's called the Fire Chief show that you said you were getting a whole lot of heat about, appropriately, no pun intended. But that's what a CMO does. He puts out fires. He or she puts out fires. And what is fascinating to me, coming from the military community, where as a commander of forces, either in combat or in peacetime, our approach was always to prepare for the worst, to always look for the next crisis on the horizon, to see how do you plan for it, how do you train for it, how do you think about what might happen, how do you put forth a bunch of assumptions on what you see may occur, how do you establish red lines and triggers to help you determine when that crisis is going to hit and how bad it's going to be. Those are the kinds of things that now are in the toolkit of not just physicians, but especially chief medical officers who are running the health systems of a campus. And there are times, I'm sure, that as a CMO, you're not going to get involved in some of the administrative factors within a hospital. But as you're, I think, training most new CMOs to think about, you should. Because, if you're a doctor and you've grown up in the healthcare arena and you're worried about patients, and someone mentions, oh, I don't know, let's pick something. Well, let's pick something topical, that your supply chain may be disrupted. Okay. And most times a chief medical officer is going to say, why am I worried about that? Somebody else is going to take care of that. Well, no, it's going to it's going to have ripple effects on you on how you treat your patients. We saw that during COVID. We have the potential for seeing it again as we discuss the national security issue of tariffs and taxes and global supply chains and things like that. I think most people today are concerned about Amazon deliveries and what the shelves are going to look like at Costco. But for a chief medical officer, you're worried about the same things that you all worried about during COVID of, are you going to get the protective gear? Are you going to get the blood? Are you going to get saline solutions, medicine, pharmaceuticals? that's just one typical example of the kind of fires that you have to put out, or at least be a part of laying the hose for in the medical field as a CMO. And there are so many others.
The insights here are incredible for me because I think about, I mean, you and I started talking to each other 2017, 2018, and worked out all of the details to begin to work together. And then bam, COVID is on the horizon. And, we had to adjust, you and I and everybody involved. But when I take that miniature lesson you just described, and I think, what would my life have looked like had I had that situational awareness, that macro environment thinking, and or tagged somebody to say, look, I can't watch social media. I can't watch the news all the time, but I need you to be informing me of what that next hot fire is going to be. Because I got trucks and battalions going this way, but what happens when it happens over here? And I think about what happened this week in Spain. So let us assume that you and I are talking about a healthcare delivery model in Spain where their supply chain is disrupted. They too are dealing with international relations and the movement of material. And then they have a statewide shutdown of their power grid. And somebody somewhere should always be, to your point, always what is the next crisis that is going to, and what if that crisis occurred today while we're trying to manage our patients today? I can't.
Well, yeah, let's use that. I
Yeah.
mean, when the shutdown occurred in Spain and Portugal a couple of days ago, it was something that I really latched onto, not only from a national security, cybersecurity kind of guy, but also from my most recent life in healthcare. Because one of the things I talked to our systems CEO about when I was working not as a doctor, but as senior vice president, and from my military experience, I said, "What's the worst?" I asked him, "What's the worst thing that can happen to you as the CEO?" And he kind of went into all these different things. And I said, okay, what if we get cyber attacked? What if the hospital is attacked and it shuts down? And he said, well, we deal with it. Okay, how would you deal with it? I mean, give me a little bit more details. And we used to have these kind of frank discussions. I said, what you may want to think about doing is take a half day exercise and shut down a portion of your hospital and see how people react when machines start stopping,
Mhm.
when the heart monitors and the pulse monitors and all the things and the paying systems and the budget office shuts down. What happens? People will be in a crisis. And one of the things I learned again from the military, Lee, is you always have to prepare for a crisis because you don't want your first indicator of how you're not doing something right to be on the field of battle. You want to figure it out before you deploy. So that's why the military does such training. And the CEO's comment to me back was, there's no way we could do that because it would cause too much turmoil. And my response to him was, okay, it could cause a lot of turmoil if it happens, but I got to tell you, if you don't prepare for the real thing, it's going to cause a lot more chaos than turmoil.
I wholeheartedly agree. And what's coming to mind as I process this is maybe somebody on the CMO team should be also designated quietly, perhaps maybe loudly, the chief medical crisis officer, whose sole responsibility is we no longer have fetal monitors coming in from country X or Y. How are we going to monitor these mother babies going through their labor and delivery? We believe our salt water, our IV fluids are going to be down to zero in about 8 days. So you don't need the whole command center operating all the time. But what exercise are you running this month? What mass casualty exercise are you running next month? And you work in concert with you. And CMS requires all of us to have emergency management plans, but usually they're in a binder. And
Right. And no
unless
one looks at them.
nobody looks at them until the moment of truth arrives. Now, in Hurricane Alley, we're a little bit more seasoned, so we have a little bit more experience. But to your point about power outage, there's hard power, meaning electricity. So fine, I can bag a patient, I can do some manual maneuvers on patient, and then there's that cyber power, how machines work. The coding, the integration of it, the ordering, and what. So you may or may not have electricity and things don't function because of that cyber universe, or you don't have electricity and you don't have even on a generator. So you pull up your generator, but the cyber universe stops those key functions even with the electricity. So
you have the electricity and everything shuts down and you can't figure out why, like we've been dealing with this morning in this podcast. You know, here's the interesting. There's a hospital in Israel that I visited because they're allegedly the best in the world at simulating crisis. It's right outside Tel Aviv. I think the name of it's Bathsheba. I'm not sure.
Sheba.
Yeah, Sheba. And they have a section of their old hospital that's just a simulation center where they rotate teams, doctors, nurses, administrators through, and they create a crisis and see how the team deals with it. And then they do what we're familiar with in the military, an after action review. What did we learn? What happened? Why did it happen? How do we fix it? How do we prepare for the next time? We don't do that very well in the United States, and we could suffer the consequences of all that. But that's all part of what a chief medical officer has to be thinking about, because when you're put, as you know, when you're put in that elevated supreme position of CMO and you've got your own parking spot and your name on the door and everybody loves you, the requirements are to have a broader field of vision. And I used to have a sign above my desk in combat that said, "What's the enemy going to do next?" And it always made me think about, okay, I've got my plans, I have the things I want to do, but the enemy gets a vote. And in my world, the enemy was insurgents or Al Qaeda. In the CMO's world, the enemy is the government at times, insurance providers, the patients, or the unknowns like the cyber attacks or the shutdowns or the hurricanes or the tornadoes. So, when you're in that CMO role, which you're training people to do, your aperture really has to widen beyond just taking care of patients.
Yeah. We do this in our academy class where we do some crisis management based out of Naval War College, things you've taught me, and we escalate real quick and try to put the pressure on the students to understand all of those dynamics simultaneously. Obviously, it's artifactual, but it gets them thinking about that macro layer of awareness. So,
well, and you just said something important, because when you do this kind of stuff, on the people who are going through the training or the preparation, they have what we in the Army call a heavy coat of sweat while they're going through it. And that is a good thing, because when you have that heavy coat of sweat, people start thinking for new innovations, new initiatives, and it helps them to think beyond the complacency which they find themselves in every day.
Yeah. Good to know. So I should look for that heavy coat of sweat next time. If not, I'm not doing a good job, and that's
Exactly.
on me. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I have critical questions that I think our listeners. So we're going to do kind of a rapid fire. My questions will sound long, but you drill down and give the audience some pointers. So, Mark, you and I both know we're experiencing a brand new type of health system crisis, which I will label a political crisis, in two areas. The first is the sweeping area of funding for all matters healthcare related, from agency, NIH, down to academic medical centers, some of that cutting edge education, research, and innovation that occurs through government sponsored funding. And then we have all of this misinformation that is moving through our atmosphere. The cause of a disease, the intervention for the disease, measles being the prime example right now. And government appointed officials are either saying something or not saying something, or moving the information to a different place. So how would a chief medical officer deal with this type of, so we're telling our CMOs, think about crises, but this is a unique style of crisis. What response would you give us?
Yeah, I'd say, first of all, in a crisis, the most important thing is communication, and it's got to be the experts communicating. So the chief medical officer has to determine who their experts are. And in a pandemic-like crisis, we already saw the experts are the virologists and the folks who understand infectious disease. So as a CMO, you've got to look around your team and say, who are the experts in the areas we're talking about? And when the misinformation or malinformation, as I call it, purposely misleading, it comes out, you get the experts out at the forefront and communicate rapidly and repeatedly. And it's got to be enough of a drumbeat with the right information to counter the malinformation or the disinformation that's going on in the web. There's a great book called The Death of Expertise by a guy named Tom Nichols. And that in that book, he talks about how experts have to be true experts have to be at the forefront instead of the alleged experts that sometimes take the microphone and talk in front of the TV cameras.
Great answer. Just fight fire with fire is what you're saying, but
with more fire.
With more fire. Love it. So go back to the
flamethrower, Lee. You fight with a flamethrower.
So now I have to have a chief flamethrower officer too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about that political football of funding, using it in a weaponized, in my words, in a weaponized fashion to alter the way we manage the source of money to deliver care to people?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one because I see it too. And that in the healthcare arena, in HHS, in CDC and in NIH, and in universities across the board who are being defunded for critical research that has made the United States the top of the game in the world in terms of finding solutions to medical problems. When those funds are cut and those funds aren't there from the government, there's got to be a replacement. And this is where I think we may see private sectors contributing to improve things. But again, that takes the uniqueness of the physicians and the healthcare experts and the disease control experts to continue the drumbeat of we desperately need this stuff.
Yeah.
And you've got to compensate for what is apparently the government taking away critical programs. I don't know how to do that. I'm not as much of an expert, but I do know that it could come from private sources who are more than willing to compensate for some of the things that governments are doing.
Hey, look, I think you gave a directional answer. If your funding isn't going to come from X, can you get it from Y? And if you can't get it from Y, can you get it from Z? And maybe that's the overarching message.
And the other thing I would say is you never let a good crisis go to waste.
Sure.
So those universities who are having all of their funding cuts better start prioritizing the things that are important versus the things that are nice to have.
Yeah.
I mean, I use the example of the wonder pill for erectile dysfunction is probably not as important as cancer research, but that's just my small brain saying something.
Yeah, we'll leave personal opinions aside on that matter.
Right.
So
exactly.
All right, next topic. All right, so you and I have discussed this. You know that leadership as a core discipline is not embedded in the medical education. There are pockets of people attempting to figure it out. And I have a generic question, but I've got to give you context. I am going to ask you, do you have an opinion about whether it should be? But here's the framing. Would it be better to allow our physician students to develop that clinical competency, get through all their training, know how to go into battle as a physician to fight disease, health, wellness, social determinants, and then begin to develop the leadership journey, or try to embed it very early on? And I'm gonna foreshadow it a little bit, because as a student and the students that I work with, they are locked in on learning the actual skills and tools to be a competent clinician first. That is where their head is at. Thoughts on where we should embark on leadership principles to carry us into this brave new world of healthcare?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of doing it from the very beginning because you can. And it doesn't take that much effort, even just the basics. And it's interesting. I'll share what's going on at the business school where I work. We had a new dean come in, and he said he had just come from the private sector. And he said, what I'm seeing in the business world is a lack of character and ethos and ethics and a lack of values. And people are doing dumb things because they don't have that development. So we've revamped the MBA program at Crummer. And the very first class people take is a leadership class, and then a strategic leadership class. So that's the conditions for how they address, the economics, the business, marketing, the operations of a business, different industries. but it's all grounded in the very first class they take of leadership. What I learned in working in healthcare is doctors are magnificent at the science of medicine. They're not so great at the art of dealing with people. And it's a people business, just like the military is. So if you say, well, we'll get to that later, first of all, you never get to it. And secondly, you have the science, so you think you know what you're doing, and you do, but you're not interacting with other people and helping them understand what you're doing. So I believe that just like in the military, you should have an element of leadership at each level of physician training.
Very profound, because it brings to mind a statement that leaders who struggle are unable to navigate the complexity of behaviors between other human beings. And you make that point clear that if you don't start early, it's already too late.
Yeah.
So well stated. Okay. Let's shift to a rather surreal topic, I think, and I know I sent this question in advance, so you've had a chance to think about it. The term moral injury was coined by the psychiatrist Jonathan Shea in the 1990s, based on his observations of Vietnam veterans struggling with the psychological impact of witnessing or participating in morally challenging events during combat. He noted that these experiences, which often involve betrayal, transgression, or conflict with deeply held beliefs, caused a distress that was not entirely synonymous with PTSD. And there's a growing voice that is using that terminology in healthcare related to the financialization of care, often derived from the power of big insurance companies. And physicians, to your point, choose to be really good at medicine, and they want to go into medicine to do that particular skill or do that good for those intrinsic motivations, those beliefs. But that infinite space of the greater good is what holds them true to their cause. And they take the oath, just like in the service, just like you and all of your servicemen and women take an oath. But many of those same doctors are now distressed by these transgressions against their oaths occurring in healthcare. And I wonder if you've given this any thought, what you might share with our listeners.
Yeah, I certainly have. And it all goes back to the development of leaders, because as you know, because we talked about it so much in our classes, when you start looking at the self, what is a leader? It's the person's character. It's the values they hold dear. And we did an exercise, as you will recall, where we were forcing people in the class to name their values. What do they believe in? Is it integrity? Is it courage? Is it, humility? What are the things that you truly believe in? And it's important to get those, because that is what drives your decision making. It takes you through the hard times in life. If you're a firm believer in integrity, you're not going to allow someone to tell a lie or to be dishonest or to watch a system break down and become chaotic. That's important to me. We're all in life going to go through times when we're disappointed by what's going on around us, and we're frustrated by our bosses. We have an expression in the Army, those bastards at platoon headquarters. It's always the next higher up person who is destroying our lives. Well, that happens in every profession, in every society, and it causes you to have a conflict with yourself. It's the proverbial man's search for meaning. To borrow a title of a book. So what we have to do is determine what our values are, what are our resilience levels, and how do we build the resilience we're going to need to prevent that post-traumatic stress or the moral injury, as you say. What can we allow to roll off our back and just say, hey, that's them and my journey through life? And what are the things where we finally say, no, we're not going to allow that, and we're going to stand up against that? Too many people let the things that should roll off their back become the generators of more frustration and anger and cruelty, and sometimes you just got to take a knee and drink some water and say, sometimes that's the way the world is. So it's building the resilience, but also having the values to rely on, and understanding that the world isn't a perfect place.
Absolutely. And then the other side of that is, when do you take a knee and then stand up and oblige the duty that this is unacceptable, and knowing where that line is? And I think people maybe have that line too low and they let all the little things get to them, and then they miss the real line where they need to stand up and call something out. And we're seeing that play out in so many facets of daily life here in the United States.
Right.
When to make the call out, where the duty to stand up for something important matters. And it's hard on
Yeah.
physicians because, back to the point about medical education, we do not embed that societal duty to stand up when things are not right.
Well, and I'll drive that point home because, you know, your audience who's watching this are seeing the two of us as magnificent specimens of manhood pontificating about all the great things we've done. But I'm sure you have stood up on a couple occasions. In fact, I know you have on at least one that I know about. And I've quit a job, in fact, two, because the fit wasn't right. And I was disappointed in the leadership, and it caused me a little bit of financial pain, and it caused some churn in my life. But you know what? It's the can you look in the mirror analogy of doing something right and walking away versus continuing to beat your head against the wall when you're not happy with what people are asking you to do.
I have done that, and thank you for reminding me about the mirror test. And I am a better person for having done what I did, whatever pain you and I both equally share. Well, listen, buddy, this has been a fabulous show. Our time is almost up. It's always great hanging out with you, and I appreciate you being on the show so much, notwithstanding our technical difficulties. Any last comments before I wrap it up for the audience?
Yeah, I got to tell your audience that it was a true joy working with you for a couple of years and bringing um, the doctors, nurses, and administrators of one particular organization, which we shouldn't name, I guess, but I think it changed their approach to the way they did business as a healthcare organization, and it allowed the physicians to have a whole lot more say in protecting the patients. And you were a big piece of that because you were the CMO of that organization at the time. So kudos to you, Lee. And it's also been fun kind of doing the research with you, especially on the most recent one we did of showing how a leadership program can contribute to loyalty or affiliation with a specific organization. And that was fun to do. And it provided a great deal of insight into how people work and what they do. So
Yes.
thanks for being not only a great CMO and passing your knowledge to others, but thank you also, Lee, for being a good friend. It's been a pleasure being your friend and being called your friend.
Thank you so much. You're a good man, Mark Hertling. You have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the CMO. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO? Do you want to be on the show? Do you have ideas about the next hot mess in healthcare that you want to hear about? Email me at leescheinbart@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can listen to our podcast on Apple or Spotify, and you can also watch the videos of the shows on YouTube. The show's website is thefirechief.podbean.com. I love talking with CMOs and other physician leaders from all over the United States. I even talk to retired lieutenant generals from the Army. So please connect with me, leave your reviews and your comments, and please share this with your colleagues. And in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.